One.
Good evening. I'm calling the regular meeting of the University Place City Council for Tuesday, September 8th, 2020 to order. We are conducting our meeting remotely in compliance with the special Open Public Meetings Act rules issued by Governor Inslee's emergency order. City Clerk, can you please conduct the roll call?
Councilmember Figueroa.
Councilmember Figueroa, present.
Councilmember Keel.
Councilmember Keel, present.
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee.
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, present.
Councilmember McCluskey.
Councilmember McCluskey, present.
Councilmember Fleming.
Councilmember McCluskey,
Thank you,
you
Councilmember.
can't hear me either, huh?
I can.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington.
Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, present.
Okay.
Mayor Belisi.
Mayor
Thank you.
Belisi, present.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
At this time, may I call for a motion to excuse Councilmember Stan Fleming as we seem to be unable to reach him at this time.
Mayor Belisi, this is Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, and I move for the approval of Councilmember Fleming's absence tonight.
Do I have a second?
Councilmember Keel, I second.
Okay. At this time, are there any dissension? Is there any dissension to excusing Councilmember Fleming? Okay, not seeing any, we will consider Councilmember Fleming excused for this meeting and hope that he may be able to join us later in the meeting. At this time, I'd like to ask Mayor Pro Tem Worthington to lead us in Pledge of Allegiance. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor Belisi. It would be my pleasure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. At this time, may I call for a motion to approve the agenda as submitted?
Mayor Belisi, Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, and I move for approval of the agenda as submitted for this evening.
Okay, I have a first. Do I have a second?
Councilmember Keel, and I second.
Thank you. I have a first and a second. Are there any objections to approving the agenda as submitted? Okay, not seeing any. The approval of the agenda passes unanimously. Okay, at this time, as in our agenda, we have a few presentations this evening, and the first one is a presentation of Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and it's a proclamation, and I have asked Councilmember Howard Lee if he could present this proclamation. So, Councilmember Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Pro Tem Lee. Before I start, I'd like to introduce two guests that I have with us. They were here last year. It's Shane Oak and his mother, Krista. And they were in the council chamber last year to celebrate the kickoff of the Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. Last year, he had just finished a year and a half worth of cancer treatment. And I am glad that I can say now that a couple of weeks ago, he was proclaimed a cancer survivor. So that's a big, big milestone.
Yay.
They are next door neighbors. His father and two daughters are next door watching this on television. We are totally conforming to social distancing here. Although we don't have a mask on in my house, they are my next door neighbors, and it's a fairly safe environment. So onward with the proclamation. The City of University Place proclamation. Whereas childhood cancer is the leading cause of
University Place on Bridgeport Way West.
Sorry. Childhood cancer is the leading cause of death by disease in children. And whereas 1 in 285 children in the United States will be diagnosed by their 20th birthday. And whereas 43 children per day or 15,780 children are diagnosed with cancer annually in the United States. And whereas there are approximately 40,000 children on active treatment at any given time, and whereas the average age of diagnosis is 6 years old compared to the 66 years for adults cancer diagnosis, whereas 80% of childhood cancer patients are diagnosed late and with metastatic disease, whereas on average there have been 0.6% increase in incidence per year since the mid-1970s, resulting in an overall incident rate of 24% over the last 40 years. And whereas 2/3 of childhood cancer patients will have chronic health conditions as a result of their treatment toxicity, with 1/4 being classified as severe to life-threatening. And whereas approximately 1/2 of childhood cancer families rate the associated financial toxicity due to out-of-pocket expenses as considerable to severe. And whereas in the last 20 years, only 4 new drugs have been approved by the FDA to specifically treat childhood cancer. And whereas the National Cancer Institute recognizes the unique research needs of childhood cancer and the associated need for increased funding due to carry this out. And whereas hundreds of nonprofit organizations at the local and national level, including the American Childhood Cancer Organization, are helping children with cancer and their families cope through educational, emotional, and financial support. And where researchers and healthcare professionals work diligently, dedicating their expertise to treat and cure children with cancer. And whereas too many children are affected by this deadly disease, more must be done to raise the awareness and find a cure. Now, therefore, the City Council of the City of University Place does hereby proclaim September 2020 as Childhood Cancer Awareness Month in the City of University Place, and encourage all Americans to observe Childhood Cancer Awareness Month and support this cause so deeply impacts families in every community across our country. Proclaimed by the City Council of the City of University Place, Washington, on September 8th, 2020. The seal of the City of University Place is affixed to this proclamation and is signed by our Mayor, Caroline Bellisi. And I want to thank Shane and his mother for coming over next door and being here to kick off the Childhood Cancer Awareness Month once again. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Councilmember Lee. At this time this evening, our next presentation is our COVID-19 update. We have Dr. Chen from our Tacoma Pierce County Health Department that is here at in our meeting this evening. I'm very honored to have you here this evening, Dr. Chen, and look forward to your presentation this evening.
Great, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I'm Dr. Anthony Chen, Director of Health of the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. First, I'm going to go through just a brief update, and then I understand you have a series of questions for me, which I'll be happy to respond to. So today, we reported 21 new cases and 1 new death. So since the beginning of the pandemic, the county has reported 6,983 cases and 156 deaths. These numbers are reported daily by 2 p.m. on our website. One of the important measures that we look at is the number of cases over the last 14 days. So there's a metric which I think many people may have heard about because it's used in when we move between phases of Safe Start, which is the total number of cases in 14 days. Today, we are reporting 60 cases per 100,000 residents. The state requires us to report a 6-day lag. So the 6-day lag is 67 cases per 100,000. So this is quite good news. To give you some perspective on, at the very beginning of June, when we moved from phase 1 to phase 2, our case rate was 16. So that's 1.6 per 100,000. We hit a high of 149 per 100,000 on August 4th, and we've been slowly coming down. Very much appreciate everyone's efforts to be wearing face coverings or face masks, avoiding large gatherings, staying at home when they don't need to be out, limiting the number of people they gather with, keeping their physical distance, washing their hands, covering their cough, doing all the things that we've asked them to do. That's the only way we have been able to bring our cases down. And I can tell you it was quite hair-raising for us in the middle of June when we started seeing this pretty sustained increase in cases. And we're so glad that things have turned around. I know that many of your residents are parents of school-aged children. I know they've been looking forward to when schools can reopen for in-person education. I know there are many business owners who are very concerned because obviously as the cases went up, some additional restrictions were placed. And of course, they're all operating below capacity except for a few essential businesses. So our average case rate in the last 2 weeks, by the way, is 39 cases a day. At our peak in July, we hit about 120 cases a day. Just to let you know that we're definitely making progress. We hope we can sustain this. We're keeping our fingers crossed that the recent long weekend did not put a big bump into it. We will know that probably in a week or so, or 10 days. Just to give you an idea of where the big spike in cases came from and where we are currently. As in many other places around the country, the big increase in cases were led by the young adults. So right now, about a fifth of our cases are in the 20 to 29-year-old range. Right in when we started having that large surge, this was actually about a quarter of our cases. So this has come down a bit. But still, when you look at those under 40, they make up 40% of our cases. One of the issues we had was while the young adults led the increase in cases, they did spread it also to the older adults as well as the younger, teenagers and young children. So I mentioned about 40% are kind of in that 20 to 40-year-old range. About a third of our cases are 50 or older, a fifth are 60 and older, and about a seventh are 65 and older. Of course, we're very concerned that as people's age increases, their risk of having complications such as hospitalizations or death increases significantly. So that really is our update now for the moment. And so I'm happy to take questions. I know you provided me with a list. I wasn't sure if you wanted me to start going through that list or whether I see there's a question here in the box.
Yes, Dr. Chen, if you could respond to the questions that we previously submitted, that would be most appreciated.
Okay, great. So the first question that you submitted was the positive number of tests reported daily, are they unduplicated number counts? If not, why? Basing decisions on numbers that don't truly reflect actual impact when repeat individuals are counted or false negatives are included. This leads to distrust of the data. So I think some of you may be aware that on August 25th, the State Department of Health announced that it was making a slight shift in how they reported their testing results. And they previously had reported only one positive per person, but then they shifted to reporting total number of tests instead of total individuals. And so, however, multiple tests on the same day are counted only once, and repeated tests on an individual are excluded after the first positive test. So Department of Health tells us that this really has not shifted their numbers significantly. But in terms of the questions about repeated, people showing up multiple times, as I mentioned, the Department of Health only reports out the positive test once for a person. So while there's some shift in the number of tests they're reporting, the actual number of positive cases has not really been impacted. So second question, how often are positive patients tested until they're determined to be negative? So, right now, there's several ways that we determine whether someone is better after a COVID-19 infection. And most of the time, this is determined clinically, that there are certain timeframes that once someone has, been afebrile for more than 72 hours and so on and so forth, that clinically they do better. One of the reasons that this is important is that, we're still learning a lot about COVID-19, and the primary test that we use for determined diagnosis can detect viral fragments. So if you test too soon after someone has been sick, the test, even though they're better, the test can still return positive because there may be parts of dead virus particles, either in their respiratory tract, which is the most common way of testing, or it also can be found in stool and other body, in other ways, because it is shed in other ways. So in general, we do not recommend testing sooner than 3 weeks after they've been tested. But again, most of the time, we will go by clinical diagnosis that as they get better, they will resolve, and they generally do not need to be tested again. The original shutdown or stay-home order was to reduce the burden on healthcare. So of those testing positive, how many are actually hospitalized? If you go to our website on our Safe Start dashboard, the hospitalization rate is one of the measures that are required by the state Safe Start program. And so roughly, when you look through the whole duration of pandemic, it has been about 5% of cases were hospitalized. That fluctuates a little bit. However, if you remember, I said earlier that this big surge that we saw starting in the middle of June, that was led primarily by young people. We know that young people tend not to get sick as much. So, the hospitalization rate among young people will be less than elderly. However, this did increase as the number of cases went up. So, as I said, this is not a straightforward question. There are different variables which depend on the demographics of who has gone sick. And in the conversation around reopening schools, for example, we know that the younger the children are, the less likely they will show symptoms. They do get sick. Often they have less symptoms. They may transmit less, but we know they can transmit. And certainly as they increase in age through the school age spectrum, certainly by the time they get into middle and high school, their transmission rate and their disease impact is starting to get similar to the 20-year-olds and the adults. Let's see, your next question. Why are decisions not based on hospital counts versus positive tests if numbers are low for hospitalizations? I think I actually answered that question as part of the previous question. So obviously not everyone who gets COVID-19 ends up in the hospital, and it's only the people who are more severely affected who are hospitalized. And then as we shift the demographics to younger people, of course, less of those will become infected. Positive case counts give us a more accurate picture of how widespread the disease is and who is affected by it. We know that deaths decreased even while caseloads went up during the summer. This is partly due to the disease affecting more young people who have substantially lower mortality risk from COVID-19, and to a smaller degree also because medical providers are learning how to better take care of patients who are infected. Next question is, how do we, the public, know where to turn for credible information on the pandemic? Yeah, this is a really important question because we have found that there's a lot of misinformation going on. In terms of statistics and health advice, you can always turn to the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department website. Just go to our webpage, www.tpchd.org, and right there on the webpage at the very top, you'll see in yellow, there are direct links from there to our COVID pages. On our COVID pages, in addition to the statistics that you heard me quote just now, also there's guidance, for example, for businesses, for schools, daycares, so on. So lots of great information there. And we have actually brought on several more epidemiologists to just to keep up with our the demand for data and to study how the disease spreads in our community. We also, on our web pages, I mentioned some of the guidance there. We help bring together the sources from reliable sources, for example, from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or State Department of Health, or OSPI. I think everyone needs to be very careful about the sources that they're reading on social media. We know that there already are significant misinformation campaigns. I think a lot of focus more recently on potential meddling in the elections, but also there's meddling going on in terms of COVID-19 health information. Next question, a deeper understanding of what the actual numbers on the dashboard really mean. So as I mentioned, every day by 2 o'clock, we will post new data to our COVID-19 dashboard. There are also certain things that we post on a weekly basis. For example, there has been a lot of interest and focus on how COVID-19 disparately affects people from different racial and ethnic backgrounds. And so that we update on a weekly basis. So let me just go through some of the numbers that we report. So new confirmed cases and total confirmed cases. We also report new deaths. Sometimes there's a little bit lag between the time we get a report of a death and when we publicly report it. And that's because sometimes there are people who are diagnosed with COVID-19, but they might die of something else. So for example, as you know, we've had quite a few deaths in elderly patients, and there might be someone who has other medical problems and dies from their heart condition or kidney condition and not from their COVID disease. So sometimes if it's not 100% clear, there might be a little delay in there while we investigate, but then we will officially announce it once we have confirmed it. With additional interest in data, we now have been reporting for some time now cases and deaths by geographic regions. If you remember early on, we didn't have as much numbers, so we created gross regions in the county. Because when numbers are very low, we don't want to report it too specifically because sometimes people can try to guess who those people are. However, we're now at a significant enough number of cases that we're reporting by census tract. And this is very important because a lot of other data is linked to census tract, and it allows us then to compare the case rates and death rates to other things, for example, socioeconomic data, or earlier I mentioned racial ethnic population within a census tract. And so that allows us to do more GIS analyses. I mentioned the rates of COVID-19 by race and ethnicity. We have seen significant disparities in our diverse communities. The highest rate is in our Pacific Islanders, our Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders, where at one point they were 4 or 5 times more likely to get COVID-19 than the white population. Now they're hovering, I think, around 3.5%. For Blacks, they are about 2.2 times the white population. Similar for the American Indian and Alaska Native community. Our Latino population, Hispanic population has been around 2.5 and increasing. This varies by local jurisdiction. So, for example, in Eastern Washington, the Latino Hispanic community is much higher because of the population and what they do. So, in the industries that they continue to work in, like in farming, food processing, very high rates of, Latino Hispanic residents in those communities. So, for example, if we look at Yakima, they have a much higher, the disparity between their Latino Hispanic community and the white population is much higher than we have here in Pierce County. In addition to that, that the under Safe Start, we have to report the total case rate per 100,000. So report that daily, as well as by the 6-day lag that the state requires us to report it as. And along with that, with the case rate, we will report average cases per day. We also report percentage of hospital beds occupied by COVID-19 patients, cases and deaths by age, cases and deaths by sex, cases and deaths by race and ethnicity. Also, if there are outbreaks in Pierce County businesses, this is one where I know we've caught a little criticism around this. In general, if a business has cases, we do not report them because we know this can adversely impact the business. It is not our, we do not want to be causing negative impacts on businesses. However, when there is a larger outbreak, we will report that, and that is to help with infection control. Similarly with congregate care living facilities like assisted livings, nursing homes, and so on, we will report larger outbreaks in those. Let's see, I think that's about it in terms of information. Obviously, lots of things we're putting on our web pages. You can spend all day looking at them if you like. And actually, you can download some of that information if you'd like to look at that. I see there's a hand up for a question.
Well, we do have some questions from our staff here. What is Pierce County's greatest challenge in combating COVID-19? And what are we doing well in regards to that?
So I think the biggest challenge that we have is right now, we don't have a vaccine, we don't have a cure for it, so we're having to entirely control this by proven public health techniques. Unfortunately, they're not necessarily fun, right? In the spring, we all lived through the stay-at-home order. That was difficult for people, both in terms of individuals trying to comply with that, as well as schools and businesses, right, who businesses had to close down unless they were essential businesses. And obviously, very short notice, all kids had to go to remote learning. It was very difficult for people to do that. And when we moved from phase 1 to phase 2, we saw what happened. I think people were very frustrated with having to do that. The weather was beautiful. They missed seeing their friends. And people just totally forgot about everything that they were supposed to do. Well, I shouldn't say totally forgot. I think many people forgot. I know that a lot of people continue to, because I got mail to that effect, many people continue to do the best they could. And so it really took a lot of work for us to put that genie back in the bottle. I do want to say people are really getting it now. I think, businesses, the statewide businesses have banded together. They put together a big media and social marketing campaign to remind people that if they want their favorite businesses to reopen and for us to be able to get back to, closer to what we used to have as a normal way of life, everyone's got to wear a face mask or a face covering. They've got to observe the physical distancing, restrictions on travel and so on. So I've been very pleased to see how many members in our community have really emphasized that. And I think when we look statewide, the masking has made a huge difference. I think that's the one thing that has allowed people to still, enjoy some degree of normalcy in their life, and not to be as restricted as when we were in the safe start, in the stay home order. So I'm very pleased to see that. I hope we can continue to see that decrease. As I mentioned, our total case rate per 100,000 is around 60 some right now. Just a reminder for us to move between phases. So if we want to move beyond phase 2, we need to get that case rate down to 25. So we still have quite a ways to go, but we have made good progress. So I do want to thank every resident here in Pierce County who has really, adjusted their lives and gone out of their way to do that. And I hope that we can continue to do that.
Okay. How can city government support your office in communicating with the public as well as with state government on concerns and issues?
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's really important. Every one of us has a slightly different audience, right? There are only so many people who listen to me. But when our business community stands up and takes a strong stand and encouraging people to support their businesses, to be able to reopen later by wearing face masks, they're reaching a different subset of the community than we are reaching. And I'm sure that you all have access to certain social networks that we don't have. So that's so important. I know that when I speak frequently with the superintendents and the heads of school, a private school, and it's so important for them to get their kids back to school for in-person learning. And I know they have been working really hard on activating their social networks. And it's not just the information, right? It's social networks help determine how people behave. We all know that. If you're a parent, you know that, right? Your kids don't listen to you, but they might listen to their friend, or they might listen to their sports coach. And that's where we really could use help. The more we get the message out, the more social networks we're able to activate so that people are embracing the behaviors we need to embrace. And let's be honest, people are giving up something, right? When we don't gather in large groups, more than 5 people, when we're not going out and traveling or taking the summer vacations that we usually do, we are giving up something. But we're giving up something because there's something else that's really important for us, right? Whether it's getting our kids back in school, getting our businesses back on their feet. So whatever your city can help us with that in getting the message out and influencing behaviors would be greatly appreciated.
Okay, one final question. I know I've been asked this by many citizens. Is Pierce County Health Department planning on doing any more local testing in the city of University Place?
So we've been very fortunate that the health department, in partnership with Pierce County, which has some mobile units now, as well as some of our medical partners, our healthcare system partners. If you're interested in getting more testing in University Place, just let us know and we'll work it in. I know, for example, I mentioned that there are particular racial ethnic communities that have been more seriously hit. We were able to respond to their request to deliver testing in sites that are important for them, where their communities congregate. We also have, if you have special needs, for example, some of these communities have asked for members of their community who can speak the language or have some social stature within their communities to help encourage participation, let us know. We're happy to include that. But yes, it's very important for us to make testing available for people. We want to find as many cases as we can so that we can initiate case investigation, contact tracing to limit the further spread of disease, and of course counter any possible stigma people have. I know I've been in some of these community meetings, and people have talked about how they've heard some people saying they're afraid of getting tested because they're afraid they're going to lose their job or whatever. But it's so important for us to be able to catch these cases and make sure that the few people who are infected get the care they need and that they isolate, and then for us to reach the people they might have been in contact with so they get tested, and we quarantine them until we know for sure and we can limit the illness.
Okay. Councilmember Howard Lee, you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Dr. Chen, I want to thank you for your presentation. It was clear, concise. I wish that all levels of government would produce that type of presentation because maybe it'd be better understood. The one question I had was the meaning of target. You mentioned it, but we appear to me to be quite a ways from the target. But we opened up, or you said that schools could open up now. So that's another threshold, or what does target actually mean?
Right. So thank you, Councilmember Lee, for that question. There are multiple targets we look at. I think that for when you look at our website, you'll see we have a Safe Start dashboard. And the Safe Start dashboard was what the governor established for us to move between phases. So remember, we started phase 1, we're now in phase 2. And so he set certain measures for us to hit. And so the 25 total cases per over 14 days per 100,000, that target there is 25 to be able to move from one phase to the next phase. However, the governor has determined that certain sectors and certain areas need special consideration. So, for example, churches and religious organizations have their own criteria. If you remember, construction opened up before other businesses. Certain businesses were also determined to be essential businesses and allowed to stay open and so on. With schools, I think the big concern is children do not learn as well when they're in remote settings. And so the governor and Department of Health created a different set of criteria for that. And when you are below 25 per 100,000, there's, pretty much, there are much fewer restrictions. However, there also was this moderate range, which was 25 to 75 per 100,000. And then at the time, it's referred to as a decision tree. At the time the decision tree was announced, we were in the high range. So we were greater than 75 per 100,000. So at that time, if you remember, that was like a month and a half ago or so. And so at that time, I'm trying to project forward, that would have said that, remote learning was, how you needed to start the school year. However, recognizing that there are certain groups of children that had very difficult time with remote learning. So those with special needs, those who were homeless, those, there's a list of them. And then they also indicated youngest learners because, as you know, the children up to grade 3, and for some educators, they feel it's even further than that, but that's when they're learning to read. They're just getting socialized into the school system. Kids at that age, just need that social and individual contact. So, I know it's confusing, but there are multiple targets we look at. I think a lot of times you hear us look at talk about that case rate per 100,000 target. And that gets confusing because recently there's been so much conversation around the schools. We've been looking at the decision tree targets, and we're glad that we're now under that 75 per 100,000. So while we cannot progress in terms of opening up businesses, opening up restaurant capacity and so on, because we're not below 25 yet, it did allow the schools to then start planning to move forward in their in-person education plans.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. I see that Council Member Stan Fleming has joined us this evening. He had his hand raised earlier. Do you have a question, Council Member Fleming?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Actually, my question was just answered by Dr. Chen, so thank you very much, Anthony. I appreciate that. It's good to see you too. Thank you.
Yes, good to see you.
Do we have any other?
Fleming, right?
Do we have any other questions of our presenter this evening?
I actually have some more on the list you submitted. So would you like me to continue with that?
Did you have some more?
Yeah.
We have a couple more minutes, sure.
Okay, so there's a question here. Are there any plans to help people with depression, anxiety with the continued stage 2 protocols into the fall and winter? Yeah, this has definitely been a great concern for us for all ages. We know that when you look on the substance use side, for example, we know alcohol sales have increased, so have marijuana sales. We also know that the number of drug overdoses has increased. So clearly people are self-medicating, and the stresses of being socially isolated or losing your job, worrying about your family, has significantly impacted both children and adults. There's so many resources available out there. I mean, obviously, if it's a crisis, people can call 911 for emergency services, or there is a crisis line, which is 800-273-8275. This also can be text, where you can text 741741. There's also the suicide lifeline, which is 800-273-8255. Many other resources available. I know this is something that we have been talking a lot about with our partners in Pierce County Human Services and also in the provider community about how, that we need to be doing more about this. So we will be looking at forwarding some proposals with our partners to get funded. I think ideally we need to create points of contact where people currently are accessing, for example, through United Way 211 or employment services, where people can be screened and then referred. We also need to make sure we have a network of services for the youth. We also need to make sure that there are services they can access directly without having to rely on their parents, or it may be something they're not comfortable discussing with their parents. So obviously lots of work going on in that area. Let's see, what other questions do you have? What data are you looking at for in the test results to use in forecasting and understanding how to better manage this virus? Of course, we're always looking at trends in this. I can tell you in June, that totally surprised us at how quickly that reversed. There's still so much about this virus we don't know. We're anticipating that this fall that we will probably see an increase in cases. The coronavirus, COVID-19, is not a flu virus. However, other viruses in its family we know tend to get worse when the weather gets worse in the fall and winter. And so we're anticipating there may be some surge in that. However, concurrent with that, the normal flu and other viruses will be active. So we anticipate there's going to be a large increase in the number of people with what we call flu-like or COVID-like illnesses. So it's going to be very important that everyone get a flu shot this year. Okay, so the recommendation is anyone over 6 months of age, unless they have a medical contraindication, should get a flu shot. And why is that? It's not that the flu shot protects you from COVID-19. It's that it's going to decrease your symptoms, right? Because probably the same with your city, but the schools, businesses, they're all asking people, do you have fever? Do you have cough? If so, don't come to work or don't come to school, right? So we want to reduce any confusion about whether you've got the flu or COVID-19. It also means that we can help relieve the pressure on our doctor's offices and emergency rooms, because then there'll be less people rushing to go get tested to see whether they're flu, other viruses, or COVID-19. So there's still so much we need to learn about this, but we're anticipating this will probably happen in the fall. But we are looking at a lot of different measures. We're looking not only the numbers, but the trends of the numbers. You've heard me talk about the demographics of the numbers. And let's see, I think some of these other questions got asked.
Excuse me for interrupting, but we are kind of behind on our agenda at this time, and I do see that Councilmember Keel has raised his hand with a question. So
Okay.
Your mic is muted.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Dr. Chen, thank you for being here. I'm interested in kind of what does just from your professional medical clinical vantage point, what does the end game or close to end game look like? And I'm thinking about how close are we, is the world to a cure or some type of protocol medication that could help combat this disease? And two, also, if we get our numbers down to under 25 per 100,000, whatever it is, I mean, I just logically thinking, I mean, the virus isn't dead, right? So, I mean, that 24th person still could be a carrier. I mean, how do we get out of the mode that we're in right now? I mean, because it seems like all it would just take is one person or two people to be at a ball game and infect 30 other people, and now we're back to where we started. So what does the end game look like?
Councilmember Keel, you're absolutely correct, right? And we're not just looking for a cure, we're actually looking for a prevention, right? Because often the cure is kind of a little late. When you think about it, I said earlier, our total cases so far, little shy of 7,000, and we've got over 900,000 people in Pierce County. So that's a tiny fraction of people who've been infected. Even if we're off by a factor of 10, so the number of people who have natural immunity from infection is very, very low, right? So what we're looking at is waiting to get an effective vaccine. And once we have a vaccine, then there's going to be a challenge of getting people vaccinated. Those of you who remember 10, 11 years ago during H1N1, the benefit there was it was a flu virus, and we know how to make flu virus vaccines. We just had to tweak it for that. But if you remember when it came out, it was a little chaotic because there wasn't enough. And so we're going to face the same challenges here. We likely will be prioritizing it for certain groups of people. So probably like first responders, medical personnel, those over 65, those with medical conditions. And then we have to get enough people vaccinated. Lots of conversation about what that number will be, might be 75%, might be more. And then while we're waiting to do all that, we have to continue wearing the face mask, doing all the social restrictions that we discussed earlier, because we really don't have a choice. This virus has shown us time and again during the short duration of this pandemic that it will fool us, and it finds every little crack, and that it will sneak in. We had things pretty controlled, but when our cases went back up, we started getting outbreaks again in nursing homes. We started getting cases in businesses. We've got to keep this controlled. One saving grace is that it looks like, and 100%, not 100% sure, but it looks like in the Southern Hemisphere, if you remember, their seasons are flipped from ours. Their flu season has been milder, and people believe this is because everyone is observing the social distancing, the face masks, and everything like that. So it tells us that if we continue those behaviors, we can keep things calm and try to contain it until we can get the vaccine, get people vaccinated, get a good level of immunity in the community. A big unknown still is how long the immunity will last for. right? So if you remember, this is in same families, cold viruses, and if you get the cold this season, you probably won't get it again this season, but next year you might, right? So we don't know. But, if we can get it controlled and at least have something, like the flu vaccine that gives people immunity for a year or one season, that will be enough for us to get this under control.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Well, Dr. Chen, I want to thank you for spending your evening with us and giving us an update on our COVID status. And I hope that any of our citizens that are paying attention to our council meetings will take to heart the need to follow the recommendations of social distancing, of limiting their exposure to individuals and their definitely masking requirements, so that we can get through this flu season with the least amount of impact to our COVID numbers as possible, so that we can hopefully by this time next year be in some sort of semi-normal activity and interactions, because I know a lot of us are going a little bit nuts with these restrictions here. And unfortunately, the people that are suffering from this are suffering in silence for fear of reaching out to health professionals. So let's keep our fingers crossed it's a mild season and that we end up with a vaccine sooner rather than later and can get back to normal. So Thank you very much for joining us this evening, Dr. Chen.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and council members, and anything that we can do to help, let us know.
Okay, keep us informed.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Good evening. All right, we're on to a real special presentation this evening. In case you guys were not aware, August 31 was our 25th anniversary. I hope each and every one of you had a toast that evening to celebrate the accomplishments that our city has gone through and over the last 25 years. This evening, our presentation is a result of some great effort on the part of our staff, Amanda Keebler and Linda Sees, as well as Pierce County TV, in producing a video for our 25th celebration. And I also want to thank our Mayor Pro Tem for participating in this video. With that, I will turn this over to both Linda and Amanda so that hopefully this video will show well on our Teams meeting here. If not, we do have a YouTube channel that you can access and re-look at this video. So I'm hoping you've all seen it and that you will watch it repeatedly to be reminded of our great successes over the last 25 years. So Amanda and Linda, take it over, please. Hi, I'm Caroline Bellisi, Mayor of the City of University Place, and I'm here today with Steve Worthington, your Mayor Pro Tem. It's hard to believe it's been 25 years since we've officially incorporated as a city, especially when I think about all that we've accomplished during that time.
You've got that right, Mayor. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was University Place. In that 25 years, we've achieved a lot. We're a community that knows what it wants. We've found ways to make it happen. I guess you could say we've come of age.
Indeed we have. I often think about the fact that since we've incorporated, we've added 39 miles of new sidewalks, and we were a community of just one park, and now we have 17 parks for our residents to enjoy, including being home to Chambers Bay, which brought us international attention. And we've created a true sense of place with our commitment to beautiful streetscaping that is the envy of our neighboring communities.
I also think about the tremendous strides we've made in really forward-thinking economic development initiatives. The village of Chambers Bay has brought about sales tax and residential development dollars to our community and created a strong foundation for us, even amid these incredibly turbulent times.
That's why I like to describe our city as small but mighty. We are recognized as a trendsetter thanks to imaginative and fearless thinking by our citizens and council, as well as our shared values and pride in place. I have no doubt we will continue to lead with new and innovative ideas that make our place a great place to live, work, and play.
I absolutely agree, Mayor. As we celebrate what we've achieved as a community over the last 25 years, I really look forward to seeing what we achieve as a community in the next 25 years.
Happy 25th birthday, University Place. Let's celebrate.
Cheers.
Cheers. Yay. We have a lot of people to thank for it, and I particularly would like to recognize Councilmember Fleming as being one of our original council members on this. If it had not been for the vision and hard work of our original council members, a lot of this would not have been accomplished. You guys did a tremendous amount of work on this, and I remember you guys being out till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning holding council meetings to make sure that we met deadlines. I remember the outcry from the community when we installed the first sidewalk on Grandview and the discussion that nobody walked. The roundabout over by the high school being such a outcry from the citizens, and we look at it today and we can't imagine not having these things in our city. So thank you to Stan Fleming and to our original council members. And this is only the beginning of our celebration. We may not have been able to celebrate publicly because of COVID-19, but we will hopefully next year be able to have a 25-and-a-half-year celebration with our community present. But our staff has also done a lot of social media outreach and set up a special hashtag, WeAreUP, so that people can record their memories and their stories over the last 25 years, and hopefully with the information and feedback that we get from our community, as well as I'm hoping our council members, old and new, that we can develop a 25th celebration video where we can all share in each other's memories and stories. So please, if you have not shared a memory or a story, I would encourage you to do so and do the hashtag so that our communication staff is able to compile and get that information. So thank you very much for that. I also realized that when I started the meeting this evening, I failed to do my pre-meeting announcement. And since we're at our portion of public comments, this is an appropriate place, I think, to do it. For public participation and comments, our public comments will be accepted via the following methods. 1, written comments or testimonies will continue to be accepted via email. As of this evening, we had not received any email comments. The comments were to have been received by 5:30 deadline this evening and provided to us for our consideration. Subject to technological limitations, the council will also accept telephonic comments and testimony by calling the number listed on the agenda, which is 1-509-342-7253. Conference ID number 944-703-238#. At this time, there is no one from the public that has phoned in. So there's no need at this time to call on them. But if in future meetings somebody's watching this, you have the information in which to call. Secondly, as we go through the rest of the items on our agenda, particularly our study session items, we will be using our round robin speaking chart that we have been using since day one of our remote meetings. So I just wanted to remind you. So public comment is done. At this time, we are on to the consent agenda. So I would like a motion to approve the consent agenda or amend it as submitted. Do I have a motion to amend or approve the agenda?
Mayor Bellisi, Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, and I move approval of the consent agenda as submitted.
Okay, I have a first. Do I have a second?
Councilmember Keel, our second.
Okay. Are there any objections to approving the consent agenda as submitted in our packet? Okay, not seeing any, the consent agenda passes unanimously. Okay, at this time, we are on to the city manager and council comments and reports. I will ask our city manager, Steve Sugg, to provide his city manager report at this time.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and apropos for this evening's the 25th birthday video, I'm going to talk about projects that are continuing the story. Here in 2020, we're going to build the next mile of sidewalk that's currently underway. It's called the Cirque Drive Phase 3 project. I think that'll push us up close to 40 miles of sidewalks. That project is a grant-funded project to complete the non-motorized network along Cirque Drive, sidewalks, bike lanes, street lighting between 83rd Avenue and Grandview Drive. As you all know, the construction is underway. You can drive down there and see it happening in real time. Curb and gutter has been placed, so that's completed. Sidewalks are scheduled for installation this month, and the project is scheduled for completion by the end of the year. So from end to end, we're going to have curbs, gutters, and sidewalks and bike lanes from Grandview Drive all the way to Orchard. So this is quite an achievement. It's been a long time in coming. Persistence and over the many years. Now, looking forward, we're not done yet. In 2021, we've got 2 construction projects planned that are currently in the design phase. One is the Alameda extension. It's a missing link on Alameda between 67th and Cirque Drive. It's in the vicinity of the Harvest Ridge neighborhood. Currently, there's no way to completely work your way through that area. So an important arterial street, Alameda, will link Cirque Drive to 67th. It includes roadway, sidewalk, bike lanes, street lighting, and landscaping. Construction scheduled for spring of 2021. And then our second project, which you all know about, which you were heavily involved with this project, and a very important one, Chambers Creek Road, Chambers Lane, Phase 1. It's a grant-funded project to improve Chambers Creek Lane and Chambers Creek Road between Bridgeport and Charles Wright, which is about 83rd Avenue, sidewalks, bike lanes, street lighting, and landscaping. And it also includes the much sought after signalized crosswalk at Charles Wright. So all funding's been secured, design work's underway, construction is planned for late 2021, so late fall of next year would be the construction start date on that. We are planning an open house and community meeting for early 2021 on that project, so look forward to that. And then one final thing, there was a question of Dr. Chen regarding testing. I'm pleased to announce a second round of testing has been announced, or at least I've been notified that the testing trailer is coming back to the old City Hall site at Windmill Village next to Homestead Park, where there's a gravel lot. They're going to set up like they did before back in August. Well, this one is on September 22nd of 2020 from 10 to 3. Pierce County Department of Emergency Management will roll their testing trailer and conduct another test. I believe last time they tested, they did close to 550 tests. So we hope that we'll see something similar to what was done then. So that's my report, Mayor.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Sugg. At this time, we're doing the round robin. Council Member Figueroa, do you have any comments or report outs at this time? You're muted, sir.
Okay, Councilmember Figueroa does not have any comments.
Okay, thank you, sir. Council Member Keel, do you have any comments or report outs?
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Just very quickly, I just want to let council know and public, Sound Transit is in the throes of doing some work around what we're calling realignment. And basically what that means is that we've got as many of you know, we've got a bunch of projects that are voter approved that Sound Transit is spending billions of dollars to deliver light rail and commuter rail, as well as bus in our three-county region. So with the effects of COVID, that has impacted sales tax, obviously, as everyone knows. And so that will impact our project scheduling. And so none of the projects that we have approved will be impacted. So we're still on the hook to deliver all the projects. It's just with the cash flow now, we're going to have to rearrange the dates and how those projects are being done. And so Sound Transit is in the throes of doing that right now, with a decision, an early decision in December, and then a final decision in June of 2021. So that's in the throes, and I just want everyone to know that that's in the works, and we'll have some data and some decisions pretty soon.
Thank you, Councilmember Keel. Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, do you have any comments or report outs at this time?
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, I have no comment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember McCluskey, do you have any comments or report outs at this time?
Thank you, Mayor. The only comment that I have.
You're fading in and out.
The Zoo Track Authority is meeting tomorrow through Zoom.
I'll come back to you, Councilmember McCluskey. You're fading in and out.
The Zoo Track reports time. You not being back because I'll just report back later.
Okay. Yeah, you're not being received, unfortunately. Councilmember Fleming, do you have any comments or report outs at this time?
Good evening, Madam Mayor. Thank you. I do not tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, any comments or report outs at this time?
Thank you, Mayor Bellisi. Just briefly, Mayor Pro Tem Worthington wants to wish everyone in University Place a happy 25th birthday as we are celebrating this year, and let the party continue on into 2021, and maybe we can get together before that year is out. So that's about it.
Thank you, sir. I could not agree with you more. 25 years deserves more than just a week or a month worth of celebration. I think we should continue it on into next year and beyond, and look forward to what the next 25 has to bring. I wanted to alert the community to the fire danger that we are experiencing here in Pierce County today and in the future, and to request that our citizens be cognizant of that and limit their outdoor fire use and even their barbecues to ensure that we're not going to end up with a similar situation that they're currently experiencing in Graham, Bonnie Lake, and Sumner. So I am holding positive thoughts and prayers to those that are currently being affected throughout our state, but in particular to our Pierce County compatriots and residents. I just wanted to remind everybody that on our next meeting on the 21st is a night for a finance committee meeting. So we have the finance committee meeting scheduled at 5 p.m. So we will be meeting earlier on the 21st. You will be getting information, of course, ahead of time, but please make sure to mark your calendar so that you can be here for that finance committee meeting at that time. Other than that, I don't have anything at this time to report out, so we will go on to our next, to our study session, and we are going to be discussing our alarm permitting program. And with that, I am going to ask our Police Chief Greg Primo to do our PowerPoint presentation. Chief, are you here? Yay.
I'm here. Good evening, Mayor and council members. First, I'd also like to say happy birthday to the city of University Place. I can remember 25 years ago being one of your first deputies that worked here as a part of the first UPPD. So I too have seen a lot of growth and expansion here in the city. So I'm glad and happy to be here as a part of the next 25. Tonight, we're going to talk about our security alarm program. So as you can see, the first slide here, we're going to talk about, I'll give you a little general overview of the program, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the fees. So right now, we're estimating we have about 3,000 to 3,500 residential and commercial alarm permits. So these are every alarm system, security alarm system in the city is required to be permitted, whether it's residential or a part of a business. And we average about 400 false alarm responses per year. Now, if you look at an alarm call, you can break them down into 3 different categories. There's burglary alarms, robbery alarms, and then panic alarms. So I pulled the data for about a 6-month period, as you can see, from January 1st of 2019 through July of 2020, give you an idea of how many alarms we get in each of those types. So a burglary alarm is going to be your typical, the residence or the business is closed, they've set their alarm, it's more for an intrusion type situation. Your robbery or panic alarms are typically activated by an employee or a homeowner who's sensing that there's something wrong, and they trigger the alarm themselves through either a panic or a robbery alarm. So you have 624 alarm calls. Out of all of those calls, only 6 of them, when the officers arrived, it generated a report because they actually found that there was some sort of criminal activity associated with that alarm call. So 99.1% of our alarm calls are false alarms. As you can imagine, that's a pretty significant, obviously, percentage, but also, you know, 400 calls for service is also a fairly large amount of calls for us. You know, over that's at least, you know, averaging at least 1 a day or more than that. So go ahead and go on to the next slide, if you would, for me. So we'll talk about the alarm permit fees. So like I said, everybody, residents or business is required to get a permit fee. Currently, that is a $23 one-time fee. The permit fees have not been updated since 2010. And again, it's always been indicated as a one-time fee, and I'll talk a little bit about where are some of those challenges. Go ahead and go on to the next slide. This is what we're proposing as moving forward. We're recommending considering a $40 annual fee. We really want to stress the importance of the annual fee. The ability to make permit owners, alarm system owners, contact the city to update their alarms, renew their system is very important to us to keep track of all of these alarms. Like I said, we're estimated 3,000 to 3,500 permits at this point because we spent the last couple of months going through a lot of the addresses and existing permits that we have. And what we have to do is compare the current homeowner on the assessor's website to the permit that we have. That allows us to make sure that that is the exact same homeowner that's there. If we do an annual fee, this will make the owner update their contact information, their subscriber information, so the person that may be contacted when they're not available and away from the house and the alarm goes off. That will also, having the annual fee is going to provide us with some ongoing resources, you know, to offset the costs of this program. So, and that's probably one of the biggest questions is really what is the cost of whether the alarm response or the program itself. I don't know if there's really a way to put a really hard, strong number on it, but I can give you my best estimate. If you're looking at purely a hardware kind of hard cost, the software alone is about $16,000 a year to run this program. It does run some other programs that we utilize, but that's the software program that is used. And I'll talk a little bit about the cost of the police response. So many years ago, Pierce County negotiated with University Place the cost of responding to a single call for service. So there's a small pocket of unincorporated Pierce County down off of Lakewood Drive and 66th Street. Pierce County Sheriff's Department doesn't have any detachments close to that area, so they negotiated with University Place to have our officers respond to any police calls in that area, and then they reimburse us for that call. Now, the amount of that call, how it was created many years ago, all those people are long retired, and there's no notes as to what exactly that went into. But I can tell you is that number was created, and then every year it increased by 3%, just like the police contract does between the city and the county. So today, we get reimbursed $244 each time we respond to a call down there. So that includes everything: the officer time, the liability insurance of responding, any type of investigation that goes on. If there's anything, after the fact, so the officers respond to an alarm, and then maybe there's some additional follow-up with that person after the fact. That's all just kind of included in that number. So between the cost of the software, then you have the police response, which I'm using that $244 number. Then you have the operation of the program itself. So our office manager is the one that coordinates everything around the alarm program. This includes, processing the permit applications, sending out notices of false alarms, the invoices, working with the program or with homeowners on any types of questions or issues around their alarms or the response, tracking all of that kind of stuff. And she estimates about 20 to 25% of her staff time is spent on the alarm program. So, if you add up all of these costs together, between the officer time, 400 calls at $244 a call, that's almost $100,000 in cost right there. The software program, and if you estimate, maybe $25,000 for staff costs in terms of our office manager and the city finance department, what they're contributing to the process, maybe that's another $25,000. So I have a rough estimate of, the program costing us right around $140,000 with that. So next component I talked about, is the annual fees are also common amongst other larger agencies. So when you're talking jurisdictions with thousands of permits, and like I said, we're in the 3,000 to 3,500 and hundreds of false alarms, having annual fees is a pretty common thing amongst those size jurisdictions. You get down to a smaller city with, only a few thousand residents, and only maybe a 100 permits. It may be okay to do a one-time fee, but as your program is much larger and more robust, it kind of requires that annual fee to help support that. So we are seeing the numbers of alarms increasing, but I will say that the technology has improved as well, so it's kind of offsetting it, that the technology is helping to reduce the number of false alarms. For example, years ago, your alarm went off, the alarm company would call into the house and nobody answered. It was immediately a call to 911 and we would dispatch officers. Now people get calls on their cell phones when they're away from the home. They even sometimes get notified on their cell phone that the alarm's going off, and they can tell the alarm company not to call right away, whether or not they have cameras in their homes to say, oh gosh, the dog set off the motion detector or what. So we are seeing an increase in the number of systems, but I don't necessarily see that the number of false alarms are increasing. I think technology is helping us out in that area. I'll jump to the next slide. So currently our false alarm fee schedule, as you can see, it's what I call a tiered fee schedule. The first false alarm is free. The second one's at that 57, third 86, and then 4 more is 115 each. And another challenge that we have is that every 6 months this gets to start over. So you get a free false alarm every 6 months. That does, well, I'll go ahead and jump it. So that's the fee schedule. Let's go ahead and jump to the next slide there. So we're talking about what we're recommending. looking at $100 per false alarm, and that's getting rid of that first false alarm for free. We do have several homeowners that are very aware that they get a freebie and they utilize it every 6 months and they count on it. The idea is we want to eliminate the very first false alarm, and we feel that having eliminating that freebie up front will help people do a better job of maintaining their systems and educating their employees and family members on how to utilize their alarms appropriately. Also, getting rid of that tiered fee schedule is more beneficial in terms of us in managing the program. Again, you have to log in as soon as somebody gets a false alarm, then we have to trigger something in the system to say, okay, now start their clock for 6 months and monitor each thing that comes in and then reset that after 6 months. So it's just another level of management that can be difficult when you're looking at 3,000 to 3,500 alarms, 400 false alarms, and whatnot. So the other component that we're asking to add is the $150 per false robbery and panic alarm. If you look back, if you recall from the very first slide, I broke down all the different calls that we have, and we had only, if you looked at robbery and panic alarms, there's only 61 of those over those 6 month period. So it's not a very common alarm that we have. Typically they're from businesses, but what it does involve is a much higher level of response from the police department. So it's demanding more resources. Robbery and panic alarms are an indication that there's a violent crime in progress. And again, these are triggered by the homeowner. So it's not technology that's doing it on its own. It's the homeowner or the employee is hitting a button or hitting some sort of a code. Again, it kind of gives us an indication that there's more urgency to this call. So officers are breaking away from other incidents to respond to this call. So it's a much higher demand on our services. So we do feel that based on that it probably should have a higher, fee associated with it. You can see just from our neighbors that it's pretty consistent along, with Tacoma, Lakewood, and Pierce County, which are some of the larger agencies around here as well. So I'll talk a little bit too about, the goal of our false alarm program. The goal is to eliminate false alarms, obviously. Our hope is that we reduce false alarms completely. We do stress education with homeowners when there is a false alarm. It doesn't, just because they're getting a fee does not mean we're not going to talk about, ways to eliminate that in the future. And I think that was one of the decisions that we made in terms of keeping this program in-house versus, Lakewood, Pierce County. I know they outsource the entire program. And so it's sent to a company in another state that processes everything, just issues bills. Whereas we kept this in-house because we felt that there was a level of personal service that still needs to be attached to this, because ultimately the goal is to, reduce those false alarms. And so our office manager does work with people when they have problems. There is an appeal process that is built into this program when people are having a problem with their alarm. All of our documentation sends out an FAQ for the alarm users so they can hopefully avoid false alarms up front. Explains a lot of the things that we ask them to check on with their alarm, as how it's set up to avoid those false alarms. So we do, this isn't just an opportunity for us to just create fees. There still is an emphasis on our end to try and educate people, because we don't just want to keep collecting fees from the same person over and over. We're hoping, again, that it's about compliance to reduce these unnecessary calls to the police department. False alarms, security alarm systems are, there is a need for the police to respond, but when you have 99% of the calls are false, we have to do something to address that use of officer time. So one last slide, if you want to go ahead. It's just recapping what our recommendations are. Again, I really highly stress the need to go to some sort of an annual renewal. And the recommendation is to consider that $40 fee as it's in line with our peer jurisdictions around us. The $100 false alarm fee, getting rid of the freebie for the first one, to really stress the need for homeowners to know how to operate their system, as well as employees, to stress that, so they don't kind of rely on that. Oh, well, once I get my first freebie, then I'll see how things are working out. And again, that was also incorporates the $150 fee for that robbery type alarms. And then finally, it's about the income. So I mentioned what this, and you can see on this slide what the projected incomes will be. And again, the cost of the program, my best guess is in that $140,000 range. But all of this funding will go to the Public Safety Fund. It's to offset some of those costs, but also help support some of our other public safety initiatives. Having that additional funding to support whether it's traffic emphasis type things that we're doing, or bike patrols, or whatever that we're trying to utilize here in the city. So, Mayor, that's the end of my short presentation on the alarm program. I'm sure there's some questions, and we'll have some more dialogue about it.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Council Member Figueroa, do you have any questions of the Chief at this time?
Councilmember Figueroa does not.
Okay. Council Member Keel, do you have any questions at this time?
Great, thank you, Mayor. Yes, Chief, for the those violent calls, false calls, where the business owner, the homeowner, is actually pushing the button. I mean, and we know that, right? I mean, the technology can tell us that this is actually someone actually pushing the button versus the technology tripping. And is there, I mean, I have an alarm system, and so I know mine, if I hit it, which I never do, but I know if I do, I have a chance, there's some time where I can cancel it, right? So the call doesn't go through and all that kind of stuff like that. So I'm assuming that people have that. So by the time an officer, if it's pushed by a person, by the time the officer shows up at the person's house or business, they would have had plenty of time to cancel the call if it was false. But if you get there and you learn that it's false, I mean, I guess I'm going through all that to kind of check my thinking. I would think that we want to charge them more than $150, right? I mean, it's just, I don't get how that happens, accidentally, if you got all that time. And I mean, I don't know, 250, 200. I mean, something that's more of a, okay, yeah, I really felt that, it would be my thinking. And then so I'll stop there.
And that's certainly a fair kind of assessment on those types of alarms. I would say that probably a vast majority, the person knows what they've done. So most panic alarms on a residential side, you have to put in a special code or press the button that says panic when you're deactivating it. And yes, the alarm company should be calling in to verify, and it gives you the opportunity to give your password to that company to cancel the call. Where we don't get those cancellations is might be like the employee who bumps the alarm with their knee. So a lot of businesses have a push button type of an alarm, and they are not aware that they've bumped it, but there's still a phone call that happens into the business to verify whether our protocol is the South Sound 901 is calling in to try and verify before we're sending officers in. Again, right. Because we're thinking this is a robbery in progress. So we're trying to call in. So there are ample opportunities. There are times that they don't get that phone call because they just don't answer the call from South Sound 911 or their own alarm company, and it ends up with the police kind of coming up to the door and getting stuck with it. But again, there are ample opportunities for them to cancel. You're correct.
Yeah. So I mean, at some point, I'm interested in raising that for that reason. So that was my interest whenever that's appropriate.
Okay. Council Member Pro Tem Lee, do you have any comments or questions at this time?
Councilmember Pro Tem Lee, I do have one question, and I may have missed it, Chief, in your presentation. But what happens if a person doesn't get a permit? And I don't personally have a home alarm system, so I don't know if the permit is separate from the alarm or how it works. But what happens if the permit is not obtained?
Yeah, so I'll start with the process a little bit from the beginning, even before that question, in the sense that we work with alarm companies. So anytime a citizen, contacts ADT or whatever alarm provider and gets set up with them, those companies are required to get a business license in UP. And so they give us a list every month of new subscribers on their end. So that allows us to send a notice to that homeowner that says, hey, we just got notice that you've got an alarm. Here's the information on how to get your permit, and it's required under a UP ordinance code. And we explain that if you don't do it, here's what's going to happen is if we respond, we're not going to respond to your alarm. You get put on the non-response list. So if you were able to kind of sneak your way through and get the alarm and you just never get that code, as soon as we do respond, you're going to get a notice for the false alarm. And then you're going to get a notice that says, hey, you need to get a permit. And if you don't pay it, then we're not going to respond anymore. And you go onto a list that if there is any calls, we won't respond.
Okay, thank you.
Council Member McCluskey is having some technical issues, but she did send a question via the chat, and she says, what is the negative to have one freebie for education and then the fee? Will this discourage people to set up an alarm, or will it not have any impact?
In my opinion, I think there is a negative to having a freebie. What we're trying to do is to change people's behavior, to make sure that they know how to operate their system appropriately. When you know you got a freebie, people will go, well, I'll figure it out after I have that false alarm. And then I'll take the time to really figure out how I need to operate this system. In my previous position, I was in charge of parking enforcement around the university. And I don't know how many times I had people come in after they got a parking ticket and said, why can't I get a freebie get a warning for my first violation? Well, because we're trying to manage, there is an issue here that we need to manage. And if everybody just automatically gets a free one, they're going to violate it for that first one until they're in a position where there's going to be some sort of consequence for the behavior. So I kind of feel the same way about the permit thing, is people will, they know they have a freebie and they'll figure out if they have a problem with their alarm, it goes off and there's a false alarm, then they'll try and figure it out after they've generated a false alarm response from the police department. I hope that answered the question.
Okay. Council Member Fleming, do you have any questions or comments at this time?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do. And I want to kind of dovetail on Council Member McCluskey's comment. And, Chief, I, number one, appreciate your presentation and the comments. And this is one that I really struggle with because I want to take a step back, and I tend to look at historical perspective on things. The reason why we chose the Pierce County Sheriff's Department to represent this city over the city of Tacoma was because we wanted a police force that was friendly to the citizens of our community, and we were all about education. The whole purpose of having a police force was one in which our citizens could feel ownership of, and when they had issues and concerns, they would want to come to the police, not run from the police when that happened. So, when we look at the alarm system, I would very kindly and respectfully disagree that if we have a freebie for a citizen, they're going to abuse that and take advantage of it and just use it because they don't care. I'll tell you, in my 30 years in UP, I've had 2 false alarms at my residence. One was because I am dumber than a box of rocks when it comes to setting the alarm system. And when when I went to unset it, the keys jammed on it and it set the alarm off. No, the second time was in the middle of the night when my wife and I were woken from our sleep with a loud crash of breaking glass, and we thought that the house was being broken into. So we called 911. We were advised, don't go downstairs until the police arrived. We had great officers that responded. And long story short, it turned out that it wasn't a break into the residence, but it was actually, we had a big, at the time, a very heavy glass, whatever you call it, things that cover the lights, that happened to just fall from the ceiling and break. The point I'm making with that story is, not all false alarms are deliberate, and I certainly don't want the council to take away the idea that someone calls the police department deliberately with a false alarm. I think sometimes, most of the time, people are genuinely feeling concerned for their lives when they call, and they're looking for help at that point. And to penalize the citizen because they feel that there's a threat on their life, I just have a hard time with that, to be honest. The idea, this escalating fee that we have, really the goal of that was to serve as a deterrent to what I call the frequent flyers. And I didn't see in the presentation tonight, of those 400 calls a year, how many of those are really frequent flyers. If we have those, then certainly we need to gear our laws to address those individuals, because that's abuse of the system. And we definitely need to change behavior in that. But if we don't have that issue, then the escalating fees make sense. Early on in the conversation, several council meetings ago, or maybe it was in staff briefings, we were talking about we need to cover our expenses if we go to this new system. And so I'm a guy who's learned to crunch numbers, and I'm looking at, and I'm using your numbers, Chief, where you were saying that the cost, a staff cost, was $25,000, and then 400 calls per year, and I did the quick math. Well, the total cost plus expenses and everything totals out at $97,400, $500. So if that's our cost, then I have a really hard time gouging our public on $180,000 a year, because why would we do that to our own citizens if we're trying to cover our cost? The other comment, and I'm just putting comments out there and food for thought, the $244 cost for responding to the unincorporated Pierce County was an opportunity for the county to cover and provide services to police services to that unincorporated part of the county, contracting with University Place so that we recovered our cost and made a little bit on that deal to provide a service. It was a win-win for the city and for the county to do that. To use that same number against our citizens, we're basically saying we're going to make money on our citizens. And so I'm a little bit uneasy with you applying that number when we're looking at what our cost for response time is. The one thing that I wasn't sold on before, but I am sold on, is that we need to upgrade the system. I don't think there's a debate on that one. How we cover the cost certainly is something we need to take into consideration as we go through that. And then at the end of the day, what kind of incentives versus disincentives versus punishment that we want to use against folks that abuse the system. I agree, a police officer's time is golden when we're looking at response. In fact, I just got a tweet here that we've got a pretty serious accident down on Grandview right now that our officers have responded to. They do their darndest to protect our city and respond to citizens. And I want to ensure that we're covering our expenses for that, but I don't want to do it at the expense of the citizens who are doing the right thing. So, Madam Mayor, thank you for letting me have my comments, and that's my food for thought.
Thank you, Councilmember Fleming. Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, do you have any comments at this time?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I do. A few questions and comments. So, Chief, how do we prioritize an alarm call? If the officer is doing something, in which case do they stop doing what they're doing, or they continue on doing what they're doing? If they have an alarm call, and then if they have a panic alarm call.
Yeah, most burglary alarms will pend for, but it also depends on what that officer is tied up on. So if they're
Could you
writing,
define pen for us?
means it'll wait till that officer is available. When they're, but for example, if the officer is doing a report or paperwork, they're going to break away from completing that administrative task to go to a burglary, but they're not going to leave a domestic violence call or some other kind of higher in progress call to go to a burglary call. So it does depend. Those robbery panic alarm calls, you're going to break away from most calls. If you're taking a citizen report on a theft or anything like that, you're going to break away to go to those robbery panic alarms. A burglary call, most calls you won't break away from. They'll have to wait for you. There's not too many. You're just more of the administrative type things, or you might be on a traffic stop that you break away from to go to a burglary to get there sooner.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I hope I answered that.
Yeah, thank you. That gives me a sense of priority. But the officer is engaged in some other activity. They're stopping that at some level. They're turning around, losing whatever time they have, and they should be if it's an important event. As well. They're there to protect our citizens. And they're going to obviously take that seriously. We have approximately 3,000 alarm systems noted in our data set, it looks like. And how many of those, do we know if they're all active, or some of them have been around for a long time and we just don't know?
Yeah, that's our best guess as we started to go through, as we were being forced out of the current alarm system program that we're using. That's where our office manager went through each of them and was trying to do our best guess to determine whether or not they're active by looking at the name and associating it with the property owner. So that's our best guess at this point. That's why we want to switch to this annual, so we have a very solid number to work with.
So when we have a reporting officer there on the scene, he or she has some data information, a name that they can say, are you Mrs. Jones or Mr. Jones, or please give me your name and see if it matches, more likely. But in any case, they have something to work with instead of a application from 15 years ago. So as I think all of us are beginning to go, yeah, I think the system needs to be updated. In fact, we don't have a choice. So that's something we need to move to. Now the question is, how do we deal with false alarms, and at what level? And I think most of us, probably all of us at some point, say, we need to penalize this, we need to change the behavior. Our officers have other real calls that they should be responsible for, or at least available for. And we know our community wants that to happen as well. So we need to find some way to say, you get one freebie a year, you get one freebie when you first install, or it's right by the book from day one, however that gets worked out. The cost of a call is an interesting item, and there's maybe some other ways we can define that. If we were to take what's the police budget?
Round number is 4 million.
Take the 4 million, divide it by the number of calls. Wouldn't that be much more than $244 per call? Mm-hmm. About 10 times.
You're making me do math here.
Yeah, so we need to look at those numbers a little bit harder, because it may not be 244. That was a number from some time ago with a 3% escalator. But there could be a different way to get there and see what that number is. So those were just some questions I had. I think, yes, I'm interested in making a change in the system. That's inevitable. I certainly want our officers to be available for live calls, not false calls. And it's trying to figure the paths how best to make that happen. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Chief, I know earlier in your presentation you had indicated that there is an appeal system in place for citizens when they do receive a penalty or a bill for a false alarm. Now, who is the person in charge of determining whether we let that fee go, or do you have the numbers of how many fees were reduced? Or
appeals that were granted. I don't have the number. So under the city codes, so the city manager appoints an appeals person, and that currently it's our public safety administrator, is not myself. So those go to her. So the person just submits their appeal after they get a false alarm, explains why they think it shouldn't be waived, and then that goes through her for review. The vast majority that come in are granted because they have a legitimate reason why they got, had to have it waived. Again, we really stress that if people are having like system errors or something like that, it's not their user error, but maybe something was wrong with their system. Those are waived. And we just encourage people to try and get their alarm company to come out and double check their system. It really is what we're focusing on is the user error part that we're trying to correct.
Okay. I mean, I'm all for updating our system. And when I owned a home in University Place, we did install an alarm system. So I did receive the one-time charge. And I know on the initial year that we had it, we had some repeat calls instigated not only by those of us that were technologically challenged, but our children. And in one instance, the door just magically blew open. But I never updated the system, and it just dawned on me when I was reading the material, I doubt that I even removed my name from the permit list when I sold the house, because there was no reminder that I had an alarm system. The permit seal was at my front door. I don't even know that when we moved out, I thought anything of removing the permit number from my front door. So I am in agreement that we need to look at doing an annual fee as a reminder to individuals. I know when we installed it, AT&T gave us the information for getting our permit and encouraged us to do it within 90 days of the installation to ensure that if there were any problems, we would receive police coverage on it. So I'm a firm believer that we need to look at that. But when we're looking at penalizing people for false alarms, we do have it sounds like we have a system in place that tends to favor the false alarms to our citizens if they can provide a legitimate reason, like the kid can't figure out the code number, or grandma came in and had issues with the code alarm upon entry into the building or whatever. But I think for our next discussion, I would like to see some more numbers of who our repeat offenders are, of the 400 plus reported false alarms that we have. The panic alarms I'm kind of concerned about, because there are legitimate reasons where a homeowner feels the need to initiate a panic alarm. And if you have 911 telling somebody, you call 911 like Councilmember Fleming said, and you hit the button for the panic that you feel that you've got an issue, I don't feel that our citizens necessarily need to be penalized for that, because that's what the police department are there for, is to make us feel safe. And we're constantly telling our citizens that if you see something, feel something, or something's not right, call 911 and we will be there. However, in the instance of a business where the panic alarm is in an area where their employees are inadvertently setting it off because of the location of the alarm or whatever, that maybe we need to look at that a little bit more strenuous, but not knowing how many repeat business owners that we have that are setting off these panic alarms, I kind of question it. So I think we need to maybe discuss more amongst council at a future study session, maybe, where we can analyze some more numbers and get some more feedback from council, because we seem to be a little bit over the board. I think we all agree that there's a need for an update, but I think there's some discussion yet to be had on how we look at instituting penalties to our citizens and to our business community. There was one other idea. I know Council Member McCluskey said that you hadn't answered the second part of her question. Will this discourage people from setting up an alarm if we have?
Yeah, so if we take away the freebie, will it discourage people from getting the alarm? I don't believe so. I don't think it's going to discourage. I think everybody gets an alarm, has the intention that they're going to be able to act, utilize it appropriately and don't have any problems with it. So I don't think it'll discourage anyone from getting the alarm. I certainly, when people ask me, I recommend a home security alarm for people if that's, it helps them feel safer about leaving their home behind when they're gone. So I don't think it'll discourage people for that. I do want to kind of talk a little bit about something that Councilmember Fleming had mentioned, and you were touching on it a little bit too, about the differences when an alarm activation versus a citizen talking to 911. So those are two different calls. So in the scenario that Councilmember Fleming had was, the alarm went off in the middle of the night, and then they got on the phone and talked to somebody and talked to 911, and they said, well, and then 911 said, don't go downstairs. And that's not an alarm call. And you should not have received a false alarm response for that. That would have been either a burglary in progress call because the homeowner is home and is saying, I need the police, versus an alarm is a technological non-human that's saying that there's supposedly a burglary going on at this house where there isn't anybody home. And then we're sending the police there. So hopefully it is getting processed that way, that if the homeowner is there for any reason, then it's not necessarily an alarm call. It is getting changed. The type of call would be a security check or a burglary in progress, and then the officer is making contact with the homeowner at the home at the time. So these alarms that we're talking about is there's nobody there. The alarm system went off. The dispatching company is called 911 and sent officers. The officers get there and they have to check the perimeter of the house. They have to, if they find something unlocked, they're going to go inside and clear the home out, and all of that type of a response. If it's something different, again, we put a lot of trust, as much as trust as we hope people put in us and into the homeowners that are calling us. If you're saying, I'm concerned that I think somebody's in my house, we're going to respond as if it's a burglary in progress. We're not going to charge you for responding because we didn't find a burglar, or if you get there and you found that something broke in the house that set the alarm off, that should not be a false alarm response. And I would say the same on a panic alarm as well. If you have a homeowner who is panicked for some reason and they called and then they realized, oh my gosh, that was my spouse or my partner is coming home unexpectedly and I didn't realize they were going to be home, so I hit the panic and we get there, that's not a false alarm response. They utilize the system appropriately for what it is intended. Again, we are really trying to focus on, the not using it appropriately, in the sense that they don't know how to use their system. They don't know what their passwords are when the alarm company calls them and says, hey, your alarm's going off, and the people are, I don't know what my password is. So that means they have to call the police. And so now we're sending 2 officers to a residence to meet the person who says, yeah, I just didn't know what my password was. Sorry, so we're really trying to focus on those situations. And that's why I say education is really stressed when we have these conversations with the public, when those false alarms happen and there's other types of issues that they have. So also just touching on the numbers again, I use the 244 number because as the person who gets the check from the county that says that was just a number that I have ever heard of, that was, hey, here's the cost of a police response, because that question comes up. And here I had a good number that's been in use for years. Maybe we're making, and Councilmember Fleming was probably there when it started a few years ago. But 244 times the 400 calls is almost 100,000 alone. And then you add the 16,000 for the software. And then if you take our staff time, our office manager time, the finance department time, I estimated that at another 25. That's pushing at 140,000. Again, I am just using this as round numbers because the question has come to me is what does it cost for us to run the program and for the police response? Again, I'm not in a position where I'm trying to gouge the citizens for extra money or anything like that. These are just recommendations from the police department as I looked at other peers' jurisdictions and what they're charging for you all to consider.
When you were explaining your costs, the costs and the amount of revenue was pretty much offset. And like you said, any excess revenue would go back to providing services to the citizens in the form of emphasis patrols or even additional education for the alarm system or whatever. So I don't feel that the current schedule or the current fee as provided is necessarily something that's going to rake in the money from a few alarm holders to offset our budgetary needs in the police department as a whole.
There's another question, it looks like, too.
Yeah, the other question was also one that I was thinking of, and that was the appeal process. That is staff time, correct? If somebody gets a bill for a false alarm, they have an opportunity before they pay that bill to appeal it, and so it's just the additional staff time. There's no actual.
They have, I believe it's 21 days to respond to the invoice for the false alarm with an appeal notice. So they have, a couple of weeks minimum to respond to say, oh no, here's my appeal. They don't have to pay anything up front for that process. We don't necessarily incur any cost other than staff time to process that appeal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question, Councilmember McCluskey? Good. I know Councilmember Figueroa, you had your hand up. I didn't ignore you. Do you still have a question or comment?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go for it.
Thank you. Great discussion. I really appreciate it. It's kind of hard to go first, but you guys really stimulate my mind. So with that, I really feel that there's a very good process. There's a very good report, Chief, on why and on the cost and the difference between a real false alarm or false whatever versus others. And because I was thinking the same thing Councilmember Fleming did, but you answered that very, very well. And so I for my part, as a council comment to move this forward, is that I would like the recommendations. And I think that the cost should be kept the same. I mean, based on the recommendation, I know that Councilmember Keel wanted to raise those fees or would like to consider maybe to study that. I think that right now I have two recommendations or comments that I like to have council bat around. And one would be, let's take a look. This is kind of new. Let's have it so that it comes back in 2 years. I'm saying 2 years, could be 1 year, okay? And report back and see if there's any adjustments we need to make. Let's not say, well, whatever we pass now is it, and let's not look at it again for another 25 years, because that's how old this system is. So how about if we just pick a year or 2 or 3, not too far out, and to review what's happened and how's it worked. And I'm saying maybe even 18 months. Let this system work itself out. The other one would be that I think that's like we get we've asked for police reports so the council can get a better idea what's going on with crime and all that. I think that it would be great to have this a report maybe once a year or twice a year, semi-annually, on what's going on with false alarms, what's going on with this alarm process, and not so much the process, that's not the right word, but how many alarms are going out, and how's it working, and maybe it's just got a report, and then maybe in about a year or 2 years we study it and say, hey, this is going well, or maybe the chief might say we need to adjust this because of this, and that's what I'm recommending. But for now, I think that what the chief has presented, and based on everybody else's comments, I say that we should move forward with that, so that the administration can move forward with getting this done, and getting this new system done. So, thank you.
Well, I like your suggestions there, Councilmember Figueroa. I think we should incorporate that in there. We are kind of behind on our agenda this evening. So Councilmember Keel, you had some additional follow-up questions.
Great, yeah, thank you. Just some comments on our discussion. So I think we need to, as a council, we need to really be cognizant of where we are with our policing. I mean, already we're upside down, and this as far as payment and the number of officers we have and the ability to respond and all those things, and to add false alarms and they're running to that is just exacerbates the problem. And in no way am I interested in gouging citizens. I mean, I in my comment about raising false alarms, I mean, I've already looked at them. I've already knew that the police do great work around making sure it's a real false alarm and not one where, something's broke and the people are very panicked about, what's going on in their house and they call the police. Of course, we're not going to charge people for that. I mean, I knew that they didn't do that. And so that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something that's a real false alarm. And we just can't, I don't think we can afford to have police chasing those kinds of things. And we need to not gouge people, but to, talk about what the real cost is for something like that. And I don't think we know that cost. To listen to the chief, saying that, hey, it's a roundabout number, and we're throwing out stuff. So I would hope that before we go into something, a part of our study would be to have, our finance department to really take sharpen their pencils to really look at the numbers. I mean, do a real study on the numbers, about what does it cost and for all this stuff. And even to the tune of what does it cost us to respond to, unincorporated, Pierce County. I mean, is the 200 right, or is it too low? I mean, I'm thinking it's too low, because if you're using a number from 25 years ago and it only raised 3% every year, we already know that number doesn't work. That math doesn't work because we've been raising the cost for 3% a year, and we're behind. So we need to be smart about this. And my feeling is that, we can be too flippant about this and too passionate about that. And we need to have some real numbers, some real data, some real analysis so that we can deal with what our police situation is. But we already know it's in dire needs right now, and we don't need to exacerbate it. Thanks.
Okay. We are running behind. Councilmember Figueroa, you had some final comments.
Oh, no, I thought I turned it off. But it says raise your hand means I don't have my hand up, but now if I turn it off, there, is it down now?
Okay.
No,
this has been a robust discussion, and I do agree with Councilmember Keel that we need to have a good idea of what our costs are. However, we need to start making an impact, I think, on this current ordinance. I think Councilmember Figueroa may have come up with a nice compromise in that we initiate the program for a year and see where our costs are, what our response times are. Does this current suggested program that the chief is proposing, does this have an impact in reducing the false alarm calls that our officers are going through? And then we can work on the actual cost per officer for looking at it in the future. Do people sound in agreement? Is there consensus in doing this, or do you think we need to have more in-depth conversation before we move this forward? Okay. All right. It sounds like we have a consensus here that we need to have some of these actual cost questions looked at and discussed in further detail for our next study session.
I don't think that's what I put my thumbs up. That's confusing. I thought you were asking that we move forward to enact on the recommendation.
Forward or further discussion?
I'm looking to moving forward and let things fall out a little bit for us to really get better numbers. That's what I'm think we should just move forward.
So, Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
I would be okay with moving forward, but I'm not. I think reviewing this a year from now is too far out. I mean, I would like to review the numbers,
before
6 months.
Okay.
Yeah, because that will give staff time to really crunch the numbers, and then we can really get into this. A year is too long, and we already know the patterns. We've been doing this for 25 years, so I don't think we need to study what stuff is. We already know. We just got to get it together.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem Worthington.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Councilmember Keel. Essentially, we can move forward incrementally here, work the numbers before we come to understand what the numbers are within a certain reasonable tolerance. Just spend a little bit more time at it, and we'll probably be there. I don't want to get prematurely out of the program, have a bad number that we're going to regret, and then we have to pull it back off from the public 6 months or a year from now. That becomes a bigger issue than it needs to be. Thank you. Okay,
Councilmember Fleming.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and Councilmember Worthington took the words right out of my mouth. I concur that we need to move this process, keep this process moving, but at the end of the day, as council members, we are the responsible party to ensure that whatever we're enacting, we're doing it with some good common sense behind us and good solid reasoning for what we're doing. Conceptually, I think we're all in consensus that the system we have is archaic. We need to create one that's a little more with the 21st century that we're living in. At the same token, and this is not to say I don't appreciate the hard work that the chief and our officers in our community are doing, but as the leaders of this community, we've got to be responsible for what we're enacting. And I think having some more solid numbers to wrap this up with, I think allows us to do that. And I'm not saying one way or another that, if we raise the rates, we're against it. If we don't, we're for it. If the numbers really support what we're trying to do, so be it. If they don't, then let's do what's right and see if we can still accomplish the same thing, but do it with some rational thinking behind it. So to Councilmember Worthington's points, I'd like to keep this moving, but let's get something behind it that really supports what we're trying to do.
Okay. Councilmember Pro Tem Lee.
Yes, I would be interested also in nailing down how many permits we're talking about, or how many alarm systems we're actually talking about. Because apparently, there may be more, and maybe less. But it would be important especially if it's less, it'd be important when we're figuring out the cost of this program. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, and Councilmember McCluskey is not in favor of moving forward until we get a better handle on the numbers, but still on board with getting a new system and program in place. So it does sound like we do need to have a second study session where we really look at the numbers in relationship to this program. I think it sounded like we're pretty much in consensus that the system is archaic and we are looking at updating the system. I didn't hear anybody voice any objections to an annual fee at this point, but maybe the annual fee amount may be of concern to some council members because the costs have not been really fettered out, and they feel that it can't be justified at this point. So I think that our next study session should be looking at the real hard cost issues in relationship to this program. Councilmember Fleming, I see you have your hand up, or did you not take it down after your last comment? From the look on your face, you did not remove your hands from Okay, so it looks like we will be having a second study session on this issue. At this time, next item on our agenda was the flash vote survey. I have been informed by the chair of the committee, our Mayor Pro Tem Worthington, that he really needed a full hour to do his presentation at this point. But given that it's not a major issue that's time sensitive, he has agreed to having this item rescheduled. So at this point, we will not be covering the last item on our agenda, given the time. One, I lost track of time. Two, we were having a nice, robust conversation, which I did not want to cut short on this. So with that, I have no further items on the agenda. So we will consider our council meeting adjourned.
Thank you
Very much.
Hey, thanks.